So I haven't been able to post in a week a video because I've had a lot of ministry activity that I've had to take care of. And I really thought when I came back to looking at the YouTube channel and stuff that I would see a major drop or some sort of drop off because of the way that the algorithm works. And actually, I was surprised to see that the last video I posted is actually the most watched video I've ever posted, the one about the Auburn revival that I just posted. And so I know it's not much. It's like 370 views. It's not even anything in the realm of YouTube land, but I'm just really excited that this content is starting to kind of get spread a little bit and catch fire a little bit. So I encourage you, if you haven't watched that video, to give it a watch. And I'm just excited and sharing the small victories with you because I want to reach more people. But today what I want to talk about is something that's been burning in my heart, and it's specifically about the Tabernacle of David and how little we actually talk about this and why that matters. So let's talk about it now. So I had a conversation with one of my best friends yesterday, and we were talking about how odd it is that we actually don't hear more about the Tabernacle of David in the body of Christ. And if I asked the normal, just kind of everyday believer about the Tabernacle of David, for the most part, most people don't have much of a grasp of what happened in the Tabernacle of David and why it is significant for our day. I know that growing up, we always had an understanding of the Tabernacle of Moses. You could have, you knew like where everything was set up, and they had Bible studies on the Tabernacle of Moses. And of course, many of them point to the person of Jesus. Those studies do, and I think that it's absolutely important. But there's this weird thing about the Tabernacle of David that kind of just gets set to the side as if it's not important. And yet, the Tabernacle of David informs our worship the type of worship that we currently do. The Tabernacle of David informs that more than anything else. There's actually a reason why we sing songs, clap, dance, all of that stuff, sing these praises. The way that we worship now is actually patterned after the Tabernacle of David, and yet we almost always only talk about the Tabernacle of Moses. Very rarely was there any sort of clapping, singing, dancing, or whatever when it came to the Tabernacle of Moses, with a few exceptions. And so it's actually really important that we understand what the Tabernacle of David is. And I'm not going to go into a teaching today. I just want to talk about one specific detail. I have plenty of teachings on this, and maybe I'll post them sometime, but that's not really where I want to go. But at the same time, it is important to know that at Acts 15, which is the Jerusalem Council, you have James standing up. And James actually prophesies that the Tabernacle of David would be in our day, would be in these last days, that he was actually establishing the Tabernacle of David in our day. The Tabernacle of Moses had its specific pattern of worship, and you had to go through the lavers and the layers and go through go through the tent, and you had to go through all of these different things in order to have a pattern of worship. You can only go into the holy place once a year. And then you have David, who it seems almost unholy and absolutely audacious, but he just takes the ark, the very thing that if the Israelites would look into, they would absolutely die. He actually takes that and plops it in the middle of the tent, and they surround it and they worship. And so that's just the basics on the Tabernacle of David. But there's something significant about that stretch. It was only a 35 to 40 year period that the Tabernacle of David existed. And yet James stands up at the Jerusalem Council, which I would venture to say is the most important, church council that ever existed. He stands up and says that Tabernacle of David reality it's now, it's today. And so it just got me thinking about it all over again. It's something I've been, passionate about for a long time. And my friend that I was talking with, man, it's just like there is this thing that God is like stirring up in us, stirring up in our hearts about this Tabernacle of David reality. And so I just, as I've been thinking about it just over the last 24 hours, pondering it, there's one specific detail that I want to kind of jump off of, going down the teaching path and just talk about one specific detail During the time of the Tabernacle of David, the Tabernacle of David was in Mount Zion, and then you actually had the Tabernacle of Moses at Gibeah. And so there was a period after David brought the ark back from the Philistines, as God had brought judgment on the Philistines. David actually marched the ark back, brought the ark of God back to the people of God, but he did not go back to Gibeah and put it in the old temple in the old tabernacle. He didn't go put it back at Gibeah. Instead, he took it and actually put it on Zion, and they surrounded and worshiped. And if you just look at it just objectively, it's like, wow, that's actually, it seems to be something that would be against the rules, and yet God blessed it, and yet God was on it. And so the weird reality that you have during this 35-40 year period until the temple is actually built, Solomon's temple is built, is that you have a 35 to 40 year period where you have the old tabernacle at Gibeah still standing, and then you have the Tabernacle of David. But the thing is that you know that the ark obviously represents, it's very clear through scripture that the ark actually represents the presence of God. So what you have here is you actually have in one place in the Tabernacle of David, you have the ark, which is which is where the presence of God rests, and then you have in Gibeah you have the Tabernacle of Moses still standing with no ark. And it's an odd reality to think about two tabernacles going at the same time for about a 35-40 year period, and it made me think about how that means that in the old system, in the old way, that's if that tabernacle is still going, if that service is still happening, they could still be ministering the effects of the tabernacle. They could still be going through all the processes, and yet it was actually not for much purpose because there was no presence. Right? There was no presence, and because the ark itself was in the Tabernacle of David. And it just made me think about how crucial the presence of God is to the ministry that we do. There was this overlap between this 35-40 year overlap between the two tabernacles. And what it makes me think of is it feels like to me a type and shadow of the moment of the 33 and a half year moment when Jesus is walking the planet, and you actually have kind of the overlap of the two covenants. You actually have the overlap of two realities, the overlap of the Old and New Testament. Jesus is literally the bridge between these two realities. He actually instituted the new covenant with the shedding of his blood. And so you actually have kind of, in a sense, two realities remaining at the same time, but one was the glory on the one was so far surpassed the old, as Hebrews talks about. And so you have, if you think about it, you have two tabernacles standing, and yet one of them is just going through the motions with no presence. And then you have one that has none of the motions that were technically prescribed. They have praise, they have worship and all of that, but they have presence. And what I'm not trying to do is actually to speak against having any sort of administration or anything like that. I'm not trying to speak against that. I'm just saying that it is possible. It is possible for us to continue doing the things of ministry, to continue doing the administration, continue doing the cog stuff of ministry for extended periods of time, and yet there be no presence. And I don't know about you, but I am one of these people that if there's no presence, there's no point. For me, if there's no presence, there's no point. And I hunger and I long for the day when people would not be okay with going back to this old system of and would not operate like the old tabernacle of going through the mechanics being enough. At the end of the day, the Tabernacle of David, the reason why it was so impactful and so incredible is because it was just completely centered around the presence of God. And I'm at the point in my life, I'm 34 years old. I'm hungry. I'm hungry for Jesus, but I'm at the point also where I cannot fathom doing ministry without the presence. I never want to be at the place in my own heart where I continue to go through the motions and the presence left years ago. And so I'm just encouraging you. It's something that in that conversation with my friend, with my good friend, it brought back up. It just began to stir back in me that passion that I've thought about this thing for years. I mean, it was such, in comparison to the main tabernacle, in comparison to Solomon's temple and the tabernacle, it's a very, very short period of time. And yet James himself, right, he was the apostle of the church at Jerusalem. He was the man. He stood up and said, no, this day that we live in is the tabernacle of David. It is meant to be a reality, a church reality that is completely centered around the presence, and all of the other hoops that they had to jump through to get to the presence even once a year, that season is over. And it's not worth it to just keep going through the mechanics and to miss out on the presence. I am somebody who cares about things being done well, things being done in order, all that stuff. I do care about that, but there is a longing in my heart that's deeper than doing anything else, and that is centering our lives around the presence. And I'm telling you that the bodies, the churches right now who are continuing to just go through the motions without presence they will not be in existence much longer. It's just not going to be the case, because people in this day, in this hour, in these last days, they have got to have presence if they're going to be faithful last days people. And so I just want to encourage you to look into this. Just stir your heart. This is a charge to you to stir your heart and look at, am I just going through the motions? Have I been taking, over these last few years, have I just been going through the motions? Am I just doing the same old stuff because that's what ministry is, or that's what we're supposed to do? And have I left the presence behind years ago? Because I promise there is no drier place than that. And so I just invite you to make just take a fresh perspective, a fresh look at everything that you are doing at this moment, and to reevaluate and reposition your life around the presence. And I'm committed to doing the same. Hope you all have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.